On live. We're about to go live.
Okay, everybody stand by.
It's about to go. It's taking its time. Here we go. Here we go. We're live.
Okay. And live from the Plutopia News Network. This is the Plutopia Happy Hour, and we are pleased to have our friend Dr. Roy Casagrande back with us, and I'm sure he's going to tell us everything is fine everywhere. Don't worry about anything. Maybe not, Roy. I'm here with Susie Sheeler, and we're driving the bus this time, so the lefties have taken control of the school bus. So let's go, Roy. Where did we head this time?
Well, I think we need to start by saying that happy hour is definitely misleading.
Yeah.
Well, not for our fellow humans.
Yeah, I think this should be called sad hour. You're on sad hour.
Yeah.
So
depressing hour. Well, yes, this is these are some depressing things to discuss that have happened right now, including well, we were going to talk about the Palestine situation because that seems to be there are a lot of things going on right now, but that seems to be, to me anyway, the most pressing, the most shocking and egregious kinds of I don't know, terrorism that are happening right now. I mean, I don't know what else to call it. They're killing children.
I guess for me, I'm hesitating because I feel like I've been on this bus before, and I know where all the stops are. And like if this is like the past, Israel bombed the hell out of Gaza, the Gaza Strip, for a few weeks. The fatalities will be in the hundreds for the Palestinians, if not in the thousands. The Israelis probably won't get to 2 digits, but right now they're at 7, so it's entirely possible they'll get to 2 digits this time. And so the death ratio will be like 100 to 1 or more.
Wow.
And then the whole world will just sit there and watch, and then afterwards we'll go back to regularly scheduled program, and nothing will change. And that's how this seems to play out.
Yeah, usually what you
done
see
right before an election, and Israel doesn't have a functioning government right now because their last 2 elections were hung up. So I'm assuming that this is an election tactic by Benjamin Netanyahu for the next time they do an election.
Yeah, usually what you see is politicians doing everything they can to not get involved, at least in this country. I'm not, some, activist politicians, but, the people that are trying to, pretend it's not happening and it'll get better, seem to always come to the forefront. And I'm hoping it doesn't end up that way because, the world really needs to step up and say something.
I mean, even dogs have the SPCA, right? The fact that the Palestinian people have essentially nobody speaking up for them anymore, in part because the rest of the Arab world has abandoned them. UAE famously signed this deal with Israel, and so did Morocco. And it looks, and of course Saudi Arabia has had Benjamin Netanyahu as a guest, and so it looks like the Palestinians are really truly on their own. There's nobody on the planet that seems to care except Syria, and Syria is winding down its civil war, so it's not really in a position to do anything. So
it seems like commerce has a lot to do with a lot of these governmental decisions. They don't want to piss off some corporation that's giving them billions or some arms dealer that's giving them lots of weaponry. So they want to just pretend it's not happening.
Yeah, for sure. In the case of Saudi Arabia and UAE, there's also a little bit of extra. It wasn't just Russia that interfered in the 2016 election. So did the People's Republic of China, so did Israel, so did the UAE, so did Saudi Arabia. And they all worked to getting Trump elected. And I think once they got their guy in there, one of the demands that Trump made was the normalization of relations with Israel. And part of that deal was that he would fast track sales of equipment that could be used to make nuclear weapons to Saudi Arabia. And so that happened. And then, of course, like the UAE played a huge role. They actually brought in a top Russian to the Seychelles. They coordinated this with Eric Prince, Betsy DeVos's brother, so that they could work on a deal on how to get a bunch of money to the Trump campaign, even though, right, it would be totally illegal. And they pulled it off. One of the things that they did, one of the tactics they did was they had one of the people in the Trump campaign, they paid him, I think it was $5 million to do a talk, when it's like normal talking fee for a guy that nobody knows is probably $500.
Wow.
And in that way, they could funnel money into the Trump campaign.
Yeah, that's typical in the whole lobbyist space. You see all of these people getting enormous fees for doing pretty much nothing.
Nothing.
It is obvious there was something going on in the back room that justified that enormous fee.
Right. But the FBI needed to investigate Hillary Clinton's emails. So
Emails, I haven't heard that yelled out lately, but I'm sure they're coming.
But her emails.
They're yelling out other things at Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez on the steps of the Capitol or wherever she got accosted by that woman. Did you hear about that, Roy?
No.
Shall not be named.
Marjorie Taylor.
Oh, she got accosted by her.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Started chasing her out of the house, screaming at her that she supported terrorists and she hated America, and you're too chicken to debate me, and all this kind of on the Green New Deal. It was just, it's embarrassing.
While he was in office.
It's so embarrassing.
It
I
really
mean,
truly is.
I think she should file a restraining order. I mean, this is like the second time. And then that other Corey, was it Corey Bush who vacated her office because she felt unsafe?
Yeah, I think that sounds familiar.
And then she put that big, I don't remember what it said, but it was an anti-trans flag outside of her office.
Yeah.
Across from the woman whose kid is trans. She is a
Business
piece of
as usual
work.
in the alleged legislative branch.
The same
It's like
legislative branch that sends Israel over $3.5 billion a year so that they can commit ethnic cleansing and genocide and steal homes right from Palestinian families.
And they did that on the last day of Ramadan, right? I mean, they had all
they did it before, because depending on which calendar you're following, it the last day was either yesterday or today. And that's what triggered the protests, which then triggered Gaza jumping in and firing rockets. The Israelis have now deployed infantry and are actually moving into the Gaza Strip. So, at that point, what's happened in the past when the Israelis were actually in Gaza as an occupation army is basically guerrilla warfare. So the Palestinians know what to do. They'll fight them tooth and nail. They're going to take heavy casualties in the process because the Israelis are just so much better equipped. But they won't go down without a fight. It'll drag out for a little while. But the whole thing is only possible because of U.S. support. If the U.S. simply cut off military aid to Israel, which, by the way, Israel gets the biggest chunk of our foreign aid. Our foreign aid is usually right around $15 billion a year. It fluctuates a little bit, and Israel gets about $3.5 billion of that. So that's a massive chunk, right? That's more than 20% of our foreign aid package. Yeah. Egypt gets $1.5 billion, and the reason is because when we made the deal with Egypt, so that Egypt would recognize Israel, we promised we would give Egypt half of what we gave Israel. We're no longer giving them half because U.S. policymakers realized Egypt wasn't in a position to sort of leverage that anymore. But in effect, we give Egypt $1.5 billion to not fight Israel and to not push back against Israeli ethnic cleansing and genocide. So really, fully one third of our entire foreign aid package is just so that the Israelis can do this. So at the end of the day, as a taxpayer, I am complicit in what is happening in Gaza.
Right.
And because this is a
Yeah.
democracy, I'm just as criminal as anybody else. And I think that's what people may be missing out on at times, that this, right, the way the news presents this is an ancient wound, it can't be healed. So that's nonsense. There's nothing ancient about this wound. It is a completely contemporary wound that the United States props up and perpetuates. And at the end of the day, I'm madder at the United States than I am at Israel. We are clearly way more at fault. They're acting out of panic and fear because they believe, the Israelis believe, that they're in a bad situation. There are more Palestinians than there are Israelis. So if they were to democratize tomorrow, they would become a minority in their own state. They also believe that they're in a weak position militarily and geographically, and the only way to maintain control then is through terror. And they're acting out of terror, and they're acting out of PTSD. We're just cynical bastards sitting in the background watching this happen with our money and our weapon systems, and we don't care.
Right. Well, I saw, and it's an interesting lens to look at it through. I've been watching some documentaries, and they interview these young people on the streets in Jerusalem, and they're asked about, how do you feel about this? What is your, and these are young people, and they just say we should kill them. They all should be eradicated. They do nothing but cause problems. They try to kill us, and we just need to, all Palestinians should die. They shouldn't be alive. And I just think, what? You're talking about human people, and are you not hearing the irony of what you're saying after what's happened to your people for so long? How can you do that to another people? I mean, it's just like, it's the whole scapegoat. Everybody's got to have a scapegoat, right? Is that it? Is that the thing? Is this really about religious land? Is it?
So one of the things that Israel regularly says is this is a secular project. The land belongs to Jews. And so it's like, wow, this is a 1984 nightmare. Which is it? Is it a secular project, or does the land belong to Jews? But one of the reasons why that conversation even happens is because what the Zionists are saying is that the Jews are a nation, not a religion. So in Israel, when you put down nationality, you're not supposed to put down Israeli, you're supposed to put down Jewish. And the reason that has happened is precisely because of Judenhass, Jew hatred, in Europe that was perpetuated on the Jewish population for centuries. Like, I believe, I could be wrong about this, but I believe the first pogrom was in 1096 AD. So the Romans were obviously sadistic towards the Jews. What I mean by pogrom, of course, is where the Jewish population in Europe is scapegoated, as opposed to Roman persecution, which was in Palestine against the Jewish population in Palestine. Right, the last time the Romans attacked the Jewish population in Palestine was in the early 7th century, so it was quite late. But in 1096, to start the Crusades, the Crusaders actually went and attacked Jewish families living along the Rhine River. And I believe the death toll was right around 9,000 people, and they raped thousands of Jewish German women. And then they went on the Crusades to go murder Muslims, but also Jews, because you got to remember there were Jews living in the Middle East, and the Crusaders butchered the Jewish and the Muslim populations as they captured Palestine and created a Crusader state. Since 1096, there was 850 years of pogroms. And those pogroms had the effect of it so cementing the Jewish identity. So, for example, if you were a Jewish German in the 1920s and 30s, and somebody walked up to you and said, "What are you?" You would have said, "I'm a German. Ich bin Deutsch." And then, no, what are you, right? You've seen this happen to your friends who are of color,
or mixed race, or
yeah. Like, where are you from? I'm from Austin. No, where are you from? Right.
Right.
So take your racist American conversation and just drop it into Germany, And that person would keep insisting they're German. But after the Holocaust, that was a little too much. And afterwards, the identity was finally cemented in. No, we're clearly never going to fit here. This is not going to work. And so the irony of Zionism is it's the acceptance that the Jews have no need to be in Europe, that Europe should be a Christian white only place. And then it is then problematic because there's already a population in Palestine. And so to do that project, what that Ashkenazi population had to do was do to Palestine what Germany tried to do to Poland. And so for the record, Germany annexed a huge chunk of Poland and then reduced the rest of Poland into a giant open-air concentration camp and systematically slaughtered Jewish Poles, but also Catholic Poles. Poland lost about 5 million people in World War II, which is insane. It's a huge chunk of their population. By contrast, Germany lost 7 million people, but Germany was the aggressors and they were,
Right.
They were fighting this insane war against Russia. You would expect German losses to be high. 3 of the 5 million deaths in Poland were, of course, Jewish. The trauma that the Jewish people experienced in World War II was through the roof. It was insane. And the world has to have sympathy for that. But then the world's solution was, let's do that trauma to Palestine. Yes. That'll make it right. Really what we should have done was we should have ethnically cleansed Austria, goddamn Austria. We should have renamed Vienna New Jerusalem and called the whole country New Israel or whatever, New Palestine, and then taken chunks of Austria out and turned them into giant open-air concentration camps. But it would have never occurred to white people to do that to white people. Well, except Hitler.
Not to other.
Well, because that's the irony of Hitler. He did to white people what we did to Black and Native American populations.
Well, speaking of that, the thing that disturbed me the most today was reports of lynchings in Israel, people looking for Palestinians to lynch. I mean, literally, those were the words they were using, and I understand at least one actually occurred, and there were several other attempts, and so they're taking the playbook right out of the old Deep South.
I mean, we're a role model. We inspired the Nazis. We've done well.
Gee, that doesn't look good on our resume.
They look great. Inspiring the Nazis.
What is this Iron Dome thing?
That's the missile defense system that clearly isn't working, right? Because Hamas has actually managed to kill 7 Israelis with rocket fire. That's actually extraordinary. Because up until now, Hamas has had almost no success in kill. Every time these little Israeli massacres of Gaza happen, 2 Israelis die. So this is 3 times the number.
Wow.
Yeah, the claims today was 90% of the rockets were intercepted by the magical
Iron Dome.
Yeah,
but U.S. taxpayers at work. Good job.
I mean, it's reminiscent of isn't that kind of what Ronald Reagan talked about?
Star Wars.
Having that big dome over us that was going to protect us from everything.
SDI, Strategic Defense Initiative.
Yeah, that ended really well.
Yeah, we successfully shot down a rocket.
For the weapons manufacturers and the aerospace industry, I mean, they made a bundle off of it.
They did.
With stuff that didn't even necessarily go anywhere, but the money went somewhere.
I want to say it was within the last decade. I could be wrong about this, but I remember we shot down a rocket over the Pacific. There was a GPS tracker on board, and that's how the targeting system. So as long as whoever is firing the missiles is polite enough to put a GPS tracker on board, we should be okay.
It's like all the ninjas wearing little flashing lights.
Exactly. And white clothing instead of black.
Yeah, that's going to happen in the real world. Yeah.
Oh my God. So, okay. Let me ask this, because I was having this conversation with a friend of mine earlier, and from what I have gleaned, neither the Palestinians nor the Israelis want a 2-state solution It's everybody else who wants them to want that. Is that correct? Or are either one of them okay with conceding?
So
To
that's
be a
that's actually a
two-state.
great question. So I met an Israeli who was a peace activist, and her whole position was one side just needs to surrender. And like on the surface of it, it was interesting. It was thought provoking. But at the end of the day, the Palestinians kind of already have surrendered.
So
So
much.
it is already a two-state solution, just for the record. I think people are a little confused about this. The idea that the Israelis had for the two-state solution was that the Palestinians would do their dirty work for them in Gaza and the West Bank. The Palestinian police would then effectively enforce Israeli policy there. If you're in Jordan and you go to the West Bank, you'll see a Palestinian flag, not an Israeli flag, Palestinian flag, and there'll be a Palestinian checkpoint. And when you walk in, you'll hand your passport over to a Palestinian who's in a Palestinian military uniform, border uniform,
Mhm.
and he's looking at you through this glass, right? You
Mhm.
hand him the passport. He turns around and he puts the passport in a drawer, and there's a one-way mirror, right, that you can see through. And there's an Israeli on the other side of this Palestinian, and the Israeli takes your passport and runs it through the computer. The Palestinian doesn't even have a computer. They're not even faking it. And then the Israeli puts the passport back in the drawer and then either rejected you and sends you back to Jordan or accepts you, and now you can enter the West Bank. So that's what the Israelis wanted from the beginning, was the facade of a Palestinian state, but with the Palestinians then enforcing Israeli policy on their own people. So think concentration camp and think of the capos, who helped the Nazis run the concentration camps.
Right.
That's what they reduced the Palestinians into. They've become capos. So what ends up happening is Palestine had one of the best democracies in the Middle East. The Palestinians had free and fair elections on a regular basis, like they were a functioning democracy. They have an election, Hamas wins. Israel and the United States say, no, we refuse. We won't accept this. And then Fatah, who didn't want to lose to Hamas, goes, cool. And Fatah basically decides it's going to ignore the democratic election and run the West Bank. So Hamas takes the Gaza Strip and breaks it away from the West Bank and runs it itself. The effect is it's actually a three-state solution. There's Fatah-ruled West Bank. There's Hamas-ruled Gaza Strip. And by the way, the Gaza Strip is so small. If you parked the southernmost corner at the southern tip of the city of Austin, the northern tip would be right around where Round Rock is. Oh. But then make it narrow, because the Gaza Strip is really narrow. So it occupies an area roughly probably a third the size of the city of Austin, but has 1.5 million people.
Oh my God.
So it's an incredibly densely populated area. They run about 40% unemployment. And most of the stuff that they've smuggled through tunnels coming through Egypt. But the Egyptians work with the Israelis to close the tunnels. It's to the point where the tunnels are so big you can run trucks through them. And that's how they get their cars into the Gaza Strip. So the Gaza Strip has smuggled cars brought in through the tunnels. And this is how sophisticated it had to become.
I've seen some of the tunnels. I was fascinated that they had been able to do such amazing. I mean, it reminded me of the cartels, just like, oh my God, how this is incredible. It is just another, people will persevere. You say you can't get drugs into a prison. Well, watch us. You can't get immigrants over a wall. Wait and watch us. We can figure it out. We can figure things out. So and that in fact is why, right? I think that happens all over that region, and you wouldn't think it would be able to. Is it mountainous all over that region?
So the Sinai is mountainous, but not close to the border with Gaza. They're out in the desert digging these tunnels. And then with the Egyptians helping the Israelis shut these tunnels down, it's a constant process of digging new tunnels. That's the state of the Gaza Strip. The West Bank has been carved up into these little itty bitty islands. Well, reservations, concentration camps. And
Okay.
what's happened is the Israelis have carved off whole swaths of the West Bank, so much so that they've taken over control of most of the West Bank. Probably about 60% of it is now Israeli controlled, and they put colonies on it. So that there's when we talk about Israeli settlers, that's what we mean. We're talking about Israelis who have gone to the West Bank and they've colonized chunks of it. Israel also controls all of the water. So,
Right.
and they've annexed all of Jerusalem. So the Palestinian part of Jerusalem, which is where this whole recent conflict has started, where the Palestinians were being evicted and Israelis were being moved into those homes. By the time they have Israeli only freeways through the West Bank, Palestinians are not allowed on them.
Mm-hmm.
And the Palestinians have to go through these back roads that require to go through these checkpoints. So at one point, I don't know what the number is anymore. West Bank is only 70 miles north-south. It's, like if you were flying over in an airplane east-west, it would take you a minute and a half.
Wow.
If you start in the north, 70 miles, we're talking about a tiny chunk of land. If you start in the north and went to the south, you had to go through 20 checkpoints. That's literally a checkpoint every 3 miles, right? So how long does that take? If it's 5 minutes a checkpoint, you know what I mean? Like just trying to commute from one end to the West Bank to the other end of the West Bank is an undoable nightmare. To make things worse, the Israelis have built a wall around the West Bank to enclose it. And they've also built a wall around the Gaza Strip too.
What is the end game here? Do they just want them to pack up and go where?
I think those interviews with those kids is what the end game is. Yeah, they want them to die, go away, and the whole world doesn't give a shit.
Did you see the kids drawing on the bombs? They were drawing.
They were writing. They've been doing that the last few times.
Yeah.
They've genocided the Palestinians.
Fuck, man. I'm at a loss that this is happening, and that I don't see how it's not so clear that this is obviously someone coming in and resettling someone's land.
I think our hatred of our hatred of Arabs is so profound, it just doesn't bug Americans. It's just not a thing. Killing cockroaches. We just murdered 3 million Iraqis and nobody gives a shit.
Yeah, this country had a good history of disenfranchising and moving out populations. Speaking for the Native Americans, my ancestors were moved out of a really nice, fertile country and moved to beautiful, scenic Oklahoma.
Yeah,
Trail of Tears. So that was, there've been plenty of that stuff, and that was considered okay, because the Great Western Expansion was more important than all those people that were here first. And
Rick Santorum gave you guys a shout out. Was that not enough? Did you hear what he said?
No, I never listened to that man.
He was talking about culture and how we need to preserve the integrity of our culture.
Nice.
And he said, we came here and we birthed a nation. We came here and made something. Okay, they were Native American, but honestly, they're not really part of American culture, are they?
Yeehaw.
We continue to rewrite history. Meghan McCain said today, okay, all right, the Capitol riot happened 4 months ago. Can we move on?
Hey, Jesus happened 2,000 years ago. Can we move on?
Can we move on?
Just let that go. Just let it go.
I'm so tired of it. Constitution, really fucking old. Can we move on?
Yeah. Every Sunday, you got to bring it up.
Sometimes on Wednesdays. Okay, so here's a question that I have that may be naive, and it may be just wrong. I was, again, watching documentaries and listening to news and Al Jazeera, different outlets, and there is some news or rumor that Iran has funded some of this Israeli aggression. Is that something that I'm misunderstanding?
It's hard to comprehend. Israel has been attacking Iranian assets in Syria. Israel has been helping the forces fighting the Houthis in Yemen. Iran has definitely picked up a lot of the slack on supporting Hamas through Hezbollah. So it's hard for me to imagine Iran and Israel working in a military fashion. Having said that, during the Iran-Contra scandal, one of the ways in which we were funneling money out of Iran when they were buying our spare parts for their Air Force, which was made up entirely of American aircraft, and there were some British airplanes too, but almost entirely American aircraft, at 4 times the market value. Israel played a major role because one of the things that they would do is they would buy Iranian pistachios or buy Iranian carpets, and then they would sell them as Israeli pistachios. And then he also helped bring the money through the laundering process so that Oliver North and his band of anti-communists could fund the Contradoras with AK-47s, ironically enough, not M16s. And also one of the biggest suppliers of the AK-47s were the Israelis, who had captured a bunch of AK-47s whenever they attacked Arab states. So
yeah, exactly.
So I want to get back to your two-state solution question, because
okay, yeah.
we didn't really fully cover it. So right now there effectively is a kind of Bantustan arrangement like South Africa had with places like Botswana and Transkei and Ciskei. So for those of you who don't know, what South Africa decided to do was, because it was, this is old numbers, obviously 40-year-old numbers, 5 million whites and 35 million blacks and like 2 million Asians. Oh, and then there's the colored, because that's the South African term for mixed, colored. And they were huge. They were in the millions. I don't remember what the number was. But obviously the 5 million whites are the ones running the show. And it looked bad because they were outnumbered 7-1 by the black population. So they came up with this really brilliant idea: carve out chunks of South Africa and then create states, give them a flag, a capital, passports, and then that way the black population, they could say, well, they're not actually South Africans, they're from Botswana. And they're guest workers in South Africa. We're so nice, we'll pay them like nothing, and then they can work here and basically live like slaves, but in another state. And of course, no one on the planet recognized South Africa's Bantustan. That's the name they got, nickname they got, was Bantustan. But that's exactly what the Israelis have done to Gaza and the West Bank. They deplete it of its land as they capture it in the West Bank, but they're also exploiting the cheap labor because the Palestinians have no choice. Like the laborers who built the wall that enclosed the Palestinians into these giant open air concentration camps were Palestinians who were trying to feed their families. The people building the colonies are Palestinians who are hired as day laborers, right? This is the ultimate white fantasy. How can I enslave a population of people?
Well, that would never happen in this country, would it?
Never. No. We wouldn't do that. I mean, the Israelis are using our playbook that Hitler was inspired by. Mm-hmm. So the easiest solution for all of this is the one-state solution. Do what South Africa did. Everybody's a citizen of equal measure, and let's have free and fair elections. And the answer is that the Israelis don't want that to happen because they become a minority in their own state. Because right now, in Palestine proper, there's over 2.5 million Palestinians in the West Bank and over 1.5 million in Gaza Strip. That's 4. And then 2 million Palestinians living in Israel. That's 6. And then there's 6 million Israelis living in Israel. But then there's like another 8 million Palestinians in Australia and Lebanon, in Jordan, in Syria, in Egypt, in the United States, in Canada, and Germany.
Are these, do they identify as Arabian Israelis, or are these Palestinians?
They identify as Arab Israelis. as
Okay.
opposed to Palestinian Israelis, because they found themselves in this awkward position of they're not exactly liked by the people in the concentration camps in the West Bank, and they're not exactly liked by their Israeli neighbors. Right, their Israeli neighbors want to genocide them just as much as they want to genocide the ones in the West Bank, and the guys in the West Bank hate them because they're like, how come you get to live a relatively normal life? I mean, you live like a black person in the United States,
Yeah.
and we're stuck, and 40% unemployment with bombs falling on our heads, and we don't.
Mhm.
Palestinians can't leave their house in the West Bank. If you leave your house unattended, the Israelis will just take it the instant you leave. So
They just took 5, didn't they?
yeah,
I mean, that was
so
that.
what you have, and those were occupied. They actually evicted
Yeah.
the people. What
And
they
had a party. It
and
was
had a
their
party,
fucking
yeah.
Ramadan.
I mean, free
fast
loans
breaking.
for everyone.
Jesus.
All
I
you
mean,
have
why?
to do is be not
What?
Palestinian.
Why would they do something so cruel on such an auspicious day and do that to that mosque when it is, I mean, it put such a bad light on them. I mean, it just makes, I can't imagine anybody seeing that and realizing the date, how they did it. That they had that huge fight at that dinner where those people were breaking their fast. And I don't, aren't they embarrassed? I mean, they're like Trumpers.
But I mean, that's just it. Nobody's going to criticize them publicly because in the United States, we have hive mind. And everybody's like, get in line, do your thing. You're free to think whatever you want as long as it's what we told you to think.
Right. They really
So
are.
at the end of the day, there's no criticism of Israel in the United States. There's no open conversation. The squad is 4 people. Ayanna Pressley is on Israel's side. As far as I'm concerned, the squad is 3 people.
Yes.
Right? She just
That's
outed
right.
herself as what she really is.
That's right.
And
Did.
so
That's true.
at the end of the day, the Palestinians are in the same situation blacks were in apartheid South Africa. They're in the same situation the Poles were under Nazi occupation. And
Agreed.
we're willing to look the other way. I can't wrap my mind around it. I don't know how anybody could call themselves ethical or not racist or not nationalist and support this.
I don't.
But then Scoop is going to take us back to where we are here, and we can talk about the Native American reservations.
It's the same thing.
Yeah, it's, a lot of this stuff is, if it happened, if police went into First Baptist Church on Sunday and did a raid, there would be great upset. But these same people are saying, well, it's no big deal, that's their problem over there, but they're working out of the American playbook, all these things they're doing to the Palestinians.
Exactly what they're doing. So I made the claim that Americans hate Arabs so much. I'll give you an example of something. It's so innocent sounding, but I feel like it encapsulates exactly how profound our hatred is. In 2008, John McCain was having a lot of trouble because there were all the anti-Obama racism during the campaign. And John McCain clearly didn't want to have anything to do with this. So a guy in the audience shouts at John McCain, "He's an Arab." And John McCain goes, "He's not an Arab, and I will not take that kind of slander. I don't want anything to do with, I don't want your vote if that's what you think about him." And of course, what they meant was, he's a Muslim. But
No,
it didn't
actually,
come
the
out.
guy said it. He
He
said
said
it.
he's an Arab. And McCain
Arab.
goes, he's not an Arab. And that's how ingrained our anti-Arab hatred is. It's an insult.
He's not an Arab. He's a very nice man.
That's it. That's what he said. That's what he said. He's not an Arab. He's a very nice man. And then he goes off on the guy. Because we all know Arabs can't be nice men.
How dare you call that man an Arab?
For the record, Arabs are 6% of the world's population. Arabic is the 3rd most spoken language, and it's either way, either as a first language speaker or a second language speaker, right? If you do first language, it goes Mandarin, English, Arabic, Spanish. If you do second language, it goes English, Mandarin, Arabic, Spanish.
Wow.
Arabs are the 6% of the world's population. They are 50% of the world's refugees.
Oh, wow.
In the last 25 years, we have successfully killed 1% of the Arab world's population in our genocidal policies in the Middle East. So that's our legacy. And again, I'm madder at us than I am at the Israelis. I think the Israelis have an excuse. They're operating out of PTSD. They're operating out of fear. What's our excuse? If we cut off military aid to Israel tomorrow, they would be forced to go to the negotiating table because they would not be able to sustain this. And we would end up with a deal probably similar to what happened in South Africa. But then they would become a minority population.
Why wouldn't we push that idea forward to everyone over there? Why wouldn't we say, hey, that we're America, this is what we'd really like you to do, instead of just blindly following, what I feel like we have been doing, which is supporting Israel no matter what.
So I think there have been moments where we started to tinker around with that. We were like, maybe leaving the Palestinians in perpetual permanent refugee status for all eternity is not a great idea. Like there's a whole UN agency called UNRWA, whose sole goal is to manage the permanent refugee status of the Palestinian population. Mm-hmm. Like there is no active attempt to figure out what to do with them. So we've had these inclinations where like, maybe. But I think at the end of the day, there's three things going on. Our permanent and total anti-Arab, and by the way, it's also anti-Muslim. For the record, being Arab doesn't make you Muslim.
Isn't it the same thing?
Yeah, there are Jewish Arabs, there are Christian Arabs. That they're not. It's not synonymous. And in the case of the Palestinians, fully about 25% of the population was Christian, and then probably 5-10% was Jewish, and then the remainder was Muslim. So Muslims were the majority of the Palestinian population for sure. So there's this anti-Arab, anti-Muslim thing that's like deeply ingrained in our society. But there's also other things at stake. In 1953, Eisenhower decided that the biggest threat to the United States was not the Soviet Union and communism, but rather it was, he had three priorities. So his first priority was to disassemble and destroy and replace the French and British empires. His goal was to take all the territory that was French and British and bring it into the US sphere of influence. His second goal was to prevent, there's a two-parter, to prevent the third world as it was breaking away and liberating itself from being too successful. So for example, in the Democratic Republic of Congo, Patrice Lumumba looked like he was going to take the DRC in a really nice direction. So the CIA needed to kill him. And then poor DRC got stuck with Mobutu Sese Seko and gets renamed Zaire, and that's just a nightmare. But that was by design. That was the American goal, right? Like Indonesia gets Sukarno, and it's going in a beautiful direction. So we bring in the CIA, and they get stuck with Suharto, and Indonesia goes to hell in a handbasket. That's part of the deal. The other part of the second part is the Arab world is trying to unify everything from Morocco to Iraq. And God apparently has a really big sense of humor. At the time, probably 60% of the world's proven oil reserves were in that region. It's less now, but at the time. And so he was thinking if there was a single economic and political entity that controls that much of the proven oil reserves, they'll have more say over oil than we will. So for the record, in the 50s, during the Eisenhower administration, it was the Texas Railroad Commission that set the global price for oil. So in Texas, we elected 3 people, and those 3 people told the world what the price of oil was per barrel. And Eisenhower didn't want to give that up. He was like, that's not cool.
They still don't want to give it up.
No.
Yeah, exactly. So he thought, how do we prevent this? And we realized, oh, wow, Israel's like a dagger stuck through the middle of that. And they can sow chaos. They can act as our proxy in wars. They can basically be the terrorist of the region and attack Egypt and attack Jordan and attack Syria and attack Lebanon. They can bomb Iraq, right? They could get all this stuff going.
Of course.
And we can just stir the pot. And then Eisenhower's third priority was, how do we stop communism? It was sort of an afterthought at that point.
That's another thing I find interesting. Everyone's against Antifa, but would they be against anti-communism? Would that be a thing?
No, they're not. Of course they're not. Yeah.
The
They are
thing that disturbs me coming from conservatives, and I've heard it for years, is we have to support the Israelis because they're whiter than those other guys. And I mean, that was just right out of their mouth. I just stood there and go, what are you talking about?
I mean, that's one of the interesting things about Israel, right? Is it's also hierarchical, not just that the Palestinians are beneath dogs, right? Because dogs have rights in Israel. But they're also hierarchical within the Jewish population. So Ashkenazi are clearly at the top, and then the Jewish Ethiopians who are Black are clearly at the bottom, and then you sort of rank down, and it's to the point where it's blatant, ugly, over the top anti-Black racism that Israel exerts on its own Jewish population. The Russians. The Jewish Russians living in Israel were mad because all of a sudden these Jewish Ethiopians, these Jewish Blacks are getting Israeli government support. So they said, we want them tested to see if they're Jewish genetically. And it turns out that, of course, the Jewish Ethiopians are from House of David, like they're the most prestigious Jewish genetic lines. And it turns out that the Russians are from House of Nothing because they've got no Jewish DNA in their blood at all. They're freaking converts.
Oh God, I love these.
So it's like layers of, wait, so let me get this straight. The Ashkenazi, maybe they're 20% Jewish genetically, and the Palestinians who have converted to Christianity and Islam are actually like 80% Jewish genetically. So what this is really is a bunch of white Europeans in Palestine murdering people of Semitic descent. And nobody sees the irony of this.
Yeah, we've never seen that happen anywhere, have we?
Never. And the solution is so obvious. We just do what South Africa did. Do a truth and reconciliation thing. Everybody's forgiven. We just move forward. We'll switch it to a secular democracy, create a Supreme Court that has, it has to be equal parts Jewish, Christian, and Muslim. And just whatever, build in safeguards, ethnic minority and religious minority safeguards. There's so many ways this could be solved. It just means that the Israeli population would have to give up stuff like the Afrikaners, like Elon Musk's family had to give up,
Right. Well, I mean, yeah, I think that we're not really, unfortunately, we're not even doing that. And so we, and we can't go in there and like we like to do and tell everybody this is how you should do it. In fact, I don't think we necessarily want them to, just like you said, everybody, they start doing well and then we jump in and kneecap them. And honestly, I sure as hell, if I were a country, wouldn't be looking to us on how to do anything right now. I mean, the Republican Party is eating their own, and the Democratic Party is becoming moderate to conservative. Although I will say that I'm pretty impressed with Biden's steps towards progress. I mean,
he looks like Bernie.
I know. I'm really, really like, what the hell is happening here? I know.
Weird. And after the speech, who did he go talk to? He went to talk to Bernie.
That's right.
That was impressive. That was a heck of a signal.
I'm
blown away.
I'm hopeful.
I'm hopeful that he won't destroy everything before 2 years are out, but he'll do it in the last third and fourth year. You know what I mean?
Yeah. Well, there are rumors going around right now that, of course, on Fox and all of that Susan Rice is actually running the country.
Oh, okay. Wow. That's cool.
Which is cool too. I'm fine with that. but there's
So you
more
said
to it.
nobody's looking to the United States. We're the only country without paid maternity leave. We're the only country without some sort of welfare system, right?
That's right.
Because Bill Clinton dismantled it. He got rid of Glass-Steagall too, which caused the housing crisis. We're the
right.
only country without universal health care. You know what I mean? Like we're
They
the only country that
sucked our
charges our
Social
college
Security.
students an arm and a leg to go to college. We are.
Exactly.
We're the only country that doesn't do metric. We're like
I-
cavemen at
Tried
this
to
point.
teach us, but we could not understand it. I was in that class when they went to new math, and I was like, I didn't like old math. I am not going to like new math. And I didn't. And you know what? The teachers didn't know how to do it. So they just stopped teaching it and we went back to old math.
Because, you know, and I get it, because 5,280 is so intuitive. Like, I mean, it's just such a logical, obvious number. Of course you were going to get that number.
After being taught feet and inches and, you know, for so long, you're like, I don't know what you're saying to me right now. My brain-
Anthropologists actually do 1/10 of an inch. You could just switch to metric. What is that? What is 1/10 of? It's 1/8 of an inch. What is wrong with you?
I've actually heard conservatives, say that's communism, and we just can't do that.
Yeah.
Just like a lot of the old conservatives, I remember them being upset because they had to like the Israelis. And I actually heard a guy said, but my parents taught me to hate the Jews, and now we've got to love them.
Oh my
Okay,
God.
Sparky, watch out what you ask for. You may get it.
Wow.
Yeah,
That's one of the dangerous things about what Zionists have done. They've made a deal with the biggest anti-Semites the world has ever seen. And the idea they're thinking is, well, they'll support Israel. But here's the crazy thing. The reason the anti-Semites in the United States love Israel is because if they can get the Jews to move to Palestine, they're not here in the United States. It's not coming from a place of love. It's coming from a place of, wow, this is like the completion of Hitler's project.
Oh God.
Very dangerous.
yeah, that's
Whoa.
their own version of the go back to Africa thing for the African American.
That's exactly what it is.
We'll buy you a ticket. No,
Yeah, we'll send you $3.5 billion a year.
Wow. I had not looked at it like that, but it really is. Well, okay, so is it true that you could, if you are Jewish, I mean, you have your, I guess it would have to be 100%. Can you go and just live in Israel?
Yeah.
So like if you're born here or born in Mexico or
I mean,
whatever.
don't be Jewish black. It makes it harder, but you can do it.
Yeah.
But it's like an extra hoop you got to jump through. For the record, the non-Jewish African immigrants in Israel are sterilized. So don't worry about miscegenating. If you want to work in Israel and you're black, you will be sterilized if you're not Jewish.
What?
Yeah. Oh yeah. You think they're going to let that slide? Have that inferior black DNA floating
Because
around in their population?
They think that Jews have always been white people.
Well, no. So in the case of the Ethiopian Jews, the logic is that their ancestors moved there hundreds of years ago and have bred into the local population, just like the Jewish Indians and the Jewish Chinese, right?
Oh,
and so
okay.
that's why
Okay,
Jews from China look Chinese, and Jews from India look Indian, and Jews from Iraq look Iraqi. That and the fact that they probably looked like that when they were 2,000 years ago being persecuted by the Romans, right? Yeah. Jesus looked like Yasser Arafat, in case you were wondering.
Right, sure.
I have two friends who are activists. One is Jewish and one is Palestinian. And the two of them are kind of famous because they hold up signs next to each other at protests. And it says, because I'm Jewish, her sign says, because I'm Jewish, I can move to Israel. And his sign says, and it says, I'm from here. And then his sign says, I'm from Palestine, but because I'm not Jewish, I can't go home. And that's a really strange setup. And if we had a solution for the 8 million who are scattered to the wind and a way to reintegrate Gaza into the world economy, and the West Bank didn't look like a skin blemish, because that's what it looks like on a map, You know, maybe there could be a two-state solution, but that's a terrible outcome, honestly, because they're two disconnected chunks of territory. The proposal the Israelis made was they would make a giant bridge over Israel so that the Palestinians would never actually touch Israel proper. All of this is built into anti-brownness, anti-Arabness, anti-blackness. This is just run-of-the-mill American-style racism that we exported to the Middle East.
Roy, we have about 3 minutes left. So in that time, where do you think all of this is going to end? What needs to be done, and what do you think is actually going to be done in this situation?
So short term, I don't think anything good is going to come of this. A bunch of Palestinians are going to die. The world is going to shrug. We're going to move on. We're going to continue to send them the money. Biden's going to say, I love Israel. I can't wait to back them. And he's going to keep trying to knock off Maduro and whatever. In the long run, Israel may not be sustainable because it's so reliant on the US, and the US is falling apart. It's economically doesn't have much of a bright future, right? Like, let's face it, there's not going to be any jobs in 20 years. So at some point, it's very likely that Israel is going to have to do the math. And the math isn't on their side. The Palestinians are reproducing at a really fast rate. The Israelis are not. And so what my hope is that the Israelis won't wait to the last minute, and they will go to the negotiating tables and they'll strike themselves a good deal. And they'll say, look, let's do something like South Africa. Here are the minority and religious safeguards we want to build into place, and we want to stay. And you know, if they approach it that way, the Palestinians will take that because that's a good deal for them because they're sick of their current status. My fear is that they're going to fight tooth and nail like a bunch of fanatics to the end, and it's going to result in a collapse, which will be violent. And who wants that? Especially because the Israelis have said point blank, if we can't keep it, we'll nuke it. And so, you know, like, is the world made better by Israel collapsing? And the answer is, I don't see any path that the world is made better. Last thing the world needs is another refugee crisis. The last thing the world needs is a self-inflicted nuclear holocaust. I think peace is a really good idea. I love it. I also like trade, work, jobs are great. I'm really into that. Love your neighbor.
So anti-peace. I thought you were Roy War.
I am. I just think war sucks.
I do too. And before we go, do you have anything you want to plug? Are you doing anything with Austin School? Are you doing anything with I Am? What's going on?
Well, we've been working on a Red Peace Machine, which has a podcast and a YouTube presence on the Austin School every week.
Nice.
Yeah. Did you have something to do with that?
I have heard of it.
Susie and I are on the Red Peace Machine together.
It's a good podcast. We've got a great cross section of people, I think, and we have fascinating discussions, just like on here. Only we're not drunk, generally,
right?
Because it's in the morning.
And I'm sorry if I came across as really angry on today's show.
No,
I'm just
there's a lot to be angry about.
Passionate. I'm upset about a lot of things too.
You know, like I don't want whites to leave the United States.
You don't want to leave
nice
it?
If we fixed our wrongs.
It would be nice if we fixed our wrongs, especially in Texas. Maybe next time we can talk about Texas and what our wrongs are with our voting.
Well,
sounds good.
We're out of time, but Roy, you are always welcome back here to give us the lay of the land and a path forward or a look backward. So keep us in your playbook because we'll be having you back.
I can't wait to come back. Thanks so much, Scoop.
Rolodex.
Thank you. And thank you for Maggie
Bye.
out there at the controls. So
Bye, Maggie.
I'm
Bye.
Bye.
Stopping the street.